Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for the European Economic and Social Committee to host the 4th edition of the Brussels Ukrainian Lab, and I'm very happy to welcome you in the premises of our committee. I'm also very happy to see such a large variety on Ukraine. Welcome once again in the premises of the European Economic and Social Committee. Thank you. As President of the External Relations section in our committee, I must assure you that Ukraine and, in fact, the Eastern Partnership are very high in our agenda. The Association Agreement gave us a mandate to establish a monitoring mechanism, the so-called Civil Society Platform, which will hold its 7th meeting in a couple of weeks and which has proven, and I'm proud to say it, the importance of the involvement of civil society in the follow-up of the implementation of this agreement. 2019 is a crucial election year for both Ukraine and also the European Union. We are challenged by waves of populism, nationalism, skepticism from inside, and threats of interference from outside. With the date of the Ukrainian presidential elections approaching, we have deeply concerned about the increasing number of assaults on civil society activists, on journalists, which are not being properly investigated. Nevertheless, we can see that civil society organizations in Ukraine have become professionalized, their capacity have been developed, improved, and strengthened, and they are likely to remain Europe's most natural ally for the future. We remain confident that the March elections will happen with respect for democracy, the rule of law, while ensuring the freedom of media and space for civil society. I would like to take the opportunity to emphasize that the EU's policy towards Ukraine must not be ambiguous, as this could lead to geopolitical destabilization by other players. We must not miss out on the momentum in terms of reforms and bringing Ukraine closer to the EU, and we need to encourage successful and sustainable implementation of the Association Agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. We are very much in favor of strong, secure, and prosperous Ukraine. Let me wish all of us fruitful discussion for today and every success to both Ukraine and you for the months to come. Thank you once again. We are very happy that you're our guest today. Olena, please.
Dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office in Brussels, we are happy to welcome you here all on our indeed already 4th edition of the UkraineLab, now this year 2019. And we are indeed happy to have this year cooperation with the European Economic and Social Committee. Thank you for this cooperation. What is the Brussels UkraineLab? This is the contribution of the Ukrainian civil society and in particular its expert community in our common work to bring, for the sake of European integration, democratization and reform process in Ukraine. Already 4 years we are bringing together professionals and all of those who are interested in advancing European Ukraine in order to discuss the most important and vital issues for Ukraine, European continent, and the world. And this year, indeed, is not an exception. Because, just to put on the context, both Ukraine and the European Union have already entered into a difficult process, electoral process of 2019. And yes, and here I will echo, facing similar threats of disinformation, rise of populism, Russian interference, and raising of dissatisfaction of a considerable parts of the population in the well-established political establishments. How shall we, besides the USA, are also in a difficult process, facing interesting challenges, which has global impacts. How shall we deal with this? Can Ukraine, EU, USA, and learn from each other? What are the visions for the future? And today, we gathered 3 equally strong and interesting panels of the public officials, experts, and advisors to the main presidential candidates of Ukraine, who will distribute to today's discussion and guide us through this difficult but so important process, which will have impact on our lives. So this is the setting up of the scene. This is why we did this event today. And before we start, I sincerely would like to thank our partners, our long-term partners, but also the new one, who already the 4th year helping us in organizing this event and the visit of a big group of the Ukrainian experts here to Brussels. And these are International Renaissance Foundation, European Endowment for Democracy, Mission of Ukraine to the EU, Mission of Canada to the EU, Mission of the US to the EU, and we are happy to welcome our new partner, Civic Synergy Project, supported by the European Union. And of course, the first cooperation with the media partner European Pravda. Those who are interested in Ukraine matters already know this media platform. We are happy to welcome you all here. Thank you for coming, and let us start. Wishing all of us a very fruitful and interesting day, so that will bring us insights about what's to be expected in 2019. And probably immediately I will put myself into the shoes of the moderator of the first panel. I will be the guide through this panel. And without any further ado, to give the floor for your questions and your interesting comments, hopefully, I would like to represent the speakers of this first panel. First of all, Your Excellency Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for European and Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. Thank you for having you with us. Integration. Thank you for having you already the second time in a row. Thank you. Mr. Danielsson, Christian Danielsson, Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations at the European Commission. Thank you for having you. And here I would have to make an important announcement. Unfortunately, Mr. Freden couldn't make his visit to Brussels, but within a couple of hours, I would say, we have managed to find not a replacement, but a representative, the US representative here, and here with us, Ms. Witmer, who is Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the US Mission to the European Union. So, we are happy to have you all here. And what this session is about? This session is about to provide us a general picture. What are the tasks for 2019? For each of the important players represented here, how they cooperate, how they impact each other, how they help each other in this year. So that in order, the purpose of this cooperation and interrelation is to make us stronger and more united and more resistant to already indicated threats of 2019. Your Excellency, Pani Ivanna, the floor is yours for tasks for Ukraine 2019. Thank you.
Okay, figured this out. Dear Olena, colleagues, ambassadors, excellencies, dear friends, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much for having this opportunity to address you in the second year in the row. I think we, having UkraineLab being organized here in Brussels, and having both representatives from the government and from the civil society, along with our international colleagues here, just proves something that we are already taking for granted, but which was totally unimaginable some 5 years ago. That means that we have an engaged, open, very sincere dialogue between different parts of the different sectors that are working to the same goal and to the same ambition of Ukraine. I also cannot but note that these days that we have the UkraineLab have been also pretty painful days for Ukraine, because we've been last week we've been commemorating our losses of the Revolution of Dignity. And obviously, this is 5 years of the Revolution of Dignity, and this is the time when you are reflecting on what has been achieved, on what went well, of what has been done and could be taken as a matter of pride, but also of those issues and those problems that still need our attention and that need our common effort in terms of in terms of delivering on the agenda that we've set for ourselves. Obviously, we are operating in not isolated country, in not isolated world. We are all interconnected. So first, let me say just a few words with regard to the backdrop on which our tasks in Ukraine are taking shape in 2019. Obviously, we are not immune to the processes that are happening in the EU, and the fact that European Union is also facing a challenge of maybe pretty historic elections to the European Parliament, and everybody understands that. That's one of the factors that is also shaping the whole situation for our country. The Brexit is basically in implementation mode. There is a stretch of efficient capability of the international institutions on different level, both within the European continent and worldwide. I would say that the security fabric is further deteriorating, and that is presenting another challenge that needs our common attention. And today, I think we are all facing the stress test for the values and for their ability to withhold with resilience all the attacks that we are seeing from the populists and from the right-wing parties that are making it to the establishment. So against this backdrop, the Ukraine has to fulfill several tasks in 2019. And that is, first and foremost, ensuring that we have free and fair presidential and parliamentary elections, and that this process is transparent and acknowledged as such by us internally and also by our partners. Also, we are faced also by the need to continue with the reform agenda and to ensure that we are building on that transformation path and those transformations that have been achieved up to date already, and are ensuring the irreversibility of all that work that has been done up to date. And the third, which should not be forgotten, is at the same time we still have to fight for preservation of our statehood. We still have to fight to defend our own territories and our lives of our citizens against aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. So I would like to make a couple of points. First and foremost, I would start from something which seemingly does not have the direct impact for some nations or for some politicians on the EU-Ukraine agenda, but I think that we have to start from the acknowledgement of the uncomfortable truth that there is a war going on the European continent. The war that has already taken away more than 13,000 human lives. The war that has already left wounded more than 30,000 Ukrainian citizens. The war that actually created the need for more than 1.6 million people to leave their homes and to find their new places for living while the war is still ongoing. So unfortunately, we see that some of the European politicians are still would like to live in the self-delusion and would like to go and follow and not see and notice the breach of the international law, the territorial theft that is happening, the militarization of the areas that are important not only for Ukraine but are also important for the countries of the European Union, and are willing to live in this self-delusion. But the lie puts, and we understand, the lie puts Europe above the conflict, while the truth is putting it exactly in the middle of it. And we believe that this Russian behavior has to get not only response from Ukraine, but has to continue getting this united, strong position from the European Union, united, strong transatlantic position, in order to ensure that we are not following the usual track of reactions between the West and Russian Federation. And the usual one, from my perspective, is kind of a cycle when we had war, then condemnation of this war, then sanctions, then some reset, and against war. So I see some of the appetite for the reset in some of the European capitals, but I hope that the Russian behavior will put all of us to sobriety, and that we will continue having the common position with among different European countries, and that it will be reinforced by a very clear position. The aggressor has to pay the price for its action, because otherwise we will only be alleviating the symptoms but not curing the disease. And I hope that we all agree here. So I just want to underline that we need to remind ourselves that the road to peace is not lying through the appeasement of the aggressor, and nor it lies through the concealing of the truth. And here I'd like to refer to the words of the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, that he has pronounced in the Ukrainian parliament just the last week. According to him, there can no be just Europe without an independent Ukraine, and there can be no safe Europe without a safe Ukraine. I hope that this notion is something that is shared by majority of the politicians, and hopefully by all the European Union member states. I see that European Union is gradually starting to understand all those stresses and all those attacks that are and all those challenges that Russia is presenting not only to Ukraine but to the European Union. And I see that finally the EU has decided to take common actions with regard to countering disinformation in Europe, with regard to actually stressing and making more stress resilient its cyber defenses. And I'm sure that this is exactly these are exactly the areas where we from Ukraine are very much interested to cooperate with Europe, and we are interested in beefing up our common actions in these areas in order to be stronger together. Those threats are unfortunately reaching every single sphere of our lives, and we should just jointly be able to tackle them in these uneasy times and be able to counter this multifaceted and full-fledged offensive which is presented by the Russian Federation. Obviously, I could not but name here also another economic threat that we see as a geopolitical threat, geoeconomic threat, and actually also a security threat, the building of the Nord Stream 2. But I hope that those processes that have been started right now with the push from the European Commission, and now with the push from the presidency of the European Union, Romanian presidency of the European Union, maybe they will lead us to a better and more sustainable solution in this respect. My next point is that from our perspective, Ukraine has to be seen as an integral part of the discussions on the future of Europe, as not only Ukraine, but also the countries of the eastern neighborhood should be seen as those ones that are participating in further looking at the agenda for the European Union and for Europe as a whole. Because Europe being a heart of the EU being a heart of Europe has proven its ability to have this incredible transformative power that we all enjoyed, and that our neighboring countries to the west from Ukraine have enjoyed, and they have actually been changed because of this appealing nature of the EU. But until recently, I think Ukraine has been a prominent absentee from these discussions, and we have started to change this approach. And I think that we have to build further on this capability that we've been able to raise over the last couple of years, and we can form our common vision for Europe in the future. I think in that regard, it's very important to know that we have had the support of by the Parliament of Ukraine, the presidential initiative of fixing in our constitution the strategic goals of European Union and NATO membership. We see it as a very motivating step for all of us who are working to reach these goals on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And this is the goal that now is not only supported by all branches of power, but it's also based on the support of the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian people. And I think that also this is the sign that we are ensuring that we are making everything possible and impossible in order to fix the irreversibility of the course that has been chosen by the Ukrainian people 5 years ago. And we are determined to continue the comprehensive reforms that would bring Ukraine to the strong democracy and a successful, prosperous European state. Obviously, we also understand that there is a great job still ahead of us, and the homework, we do know our homework. However, in this homework, we are also counting on the strong support of the European Union. We are counting also on the strong support from our transatlantic partners in order to make this transition that we are undergoing from the Soviet heritage, from the imperial heritage, as smooth and as mutually beneficial as possible. From my perspective, and I've been pretty vocal about that, I think any ambiguity with regard to the future fate of Ukraine with the European Union in terms of European project development is only undermining the efforts, the reformist efforts in Ukraine. So I think that has to be taken into account and actually worked on from the point of view of the European Union. My next point is that Ukraine is profoundly different from Ukraine of 2014. Over the last 5 years, we, in the Ukrainian leadership, which was and is supported by the vibrant civil society and international community, we have really made impressive efforts to promote vital reforms and strengthen Ukraine's resilience and democracy. We have managed to smoothly launch, to the astonishment of many, a number of structural, very difficult reforms. Those include the ones that the impetus has been given to the reforms in the energy and energy efficiency sector, in banking sector, in tax system, in public procurement, in judiciary, the progress that we have achieved in decentralization, in public administration reform, in deregulation, in pension system, in small privatization, in transparency. That was really something very conceivable over the last 5 years. I think the start of the education reform and medical reform, this is also a cornerstones of the change for the people first and foremost. And one probably gets tired only from naming the areas where you started the work on different different reform tracks. And all of these efforts have actually led to the situation that today we have a very stable, pretty impressively stable macrofinancial and macroeconomic situation. 3.4% growth of GDP for 2018. That might be not something that we are, targeting at, but this gives us the prospect of further development in the same the same direction, and further development of the country and ability to actually transfer that reform agenda to the benefit of every single citizen. For the first time over this 5 years, the inflation in Ukraine is in single-digit numbers. I think it's also a very important thing. Our reserves, with the engagement of the EU, with the engagement of the IMF or our other international partners, but have reached more than 20 billion US dollars. All of this obviously is incredibly important for the further capability and irreversibility of what we have achieved up to date. We are prioritizing for the next year the need for continuing to work on economic growth through different instruments to ensure sufficiency of the public administration reform. We have to work on rising the life standards for Ukrainian people, and obviously strengthening further our defense and security capabilities, rule of law, and the fight against corruption. In that last respect, I would like to mention that we are sure that before June of 2019 we will have the Anti-Corruption High Court full and operational. I can only confirm that 2018 has been a decisive year from our perspective for European integration. I think all the work that we have put in all the effort that we have put in order to prioritize, plan, monitor our association agreement implementation has been finally giving some fruit. And that's why we also see the results in terms of our exports growing to the EU. 42% of our external trade turnover is going to the EU countries. We do have more than 15,000 Ukrainian enterprises that are already exporting their products to the EU. Only over this last year, we have fulfilled a significant amount of commitments within the association agreement, in particular in the sphere of social policy, agriculture, labor relations, in the approximation of the EU legislation in the field of entrepreneurship, in the deregulation area. By the way, as of January 1st, about 18,000 of the outdated standards which were developed before 1992 have been finally abolished. So this means that the tracks of the engagement and the work that is being done is absolutely incredibly wide, and this is the reflection of the association agreement that is the most ambitious and the biggest and the hardest probably association agreement that has ever been signed between the EU and any other third state. So we do truly believe that successful reform process will be delivering good governance, will be delivering rule of law and democratic institutions and prosperity for the Ukrainian people, and this remains our major task. So for us, our European integration plans are clear. We implement them step by step. We have outlined our priorities based on the association agreement in the work of the summits of the 20th summit between the Ukraine and the EU. We have fixed it in the Association Council's decision. So we have 4 major areas on which we are concentrating our attention within the Association Agreement. That not to say that we are diminishing the role of the other areas, but these are something that we see as a mutually beneficial possible breakthrough areas, and that's energy, that's customs cooperation, that's digital cooperation, and as well as technical regulation and new agenda in the justice and hope affairs. And I hope that in the next summit, or the 21st summit of the EU-Ukraine, we will have the further, fixing of these priorities with some practical decisions already in place. So what's important that all of these changes, all of these reforms that are being made, these are not only about rules and procedures. These are not only about, bureaucratic language. These are about overcoming that Soviet and imperial heritage. These are about overcoming the patriarchal attitudes of the society and basically confronting the kleptocracy of oligarchs that have been the one of the diseases that Ukraine has been suffering from. Upcoming elections in Ukraine and the EU, from my perspective, should not be intruding in these dynamics and the nature of these bilateral relations that we have worked on up to date. And I believe that in this turbulent times and challenging times, it's important that both sides really uphold the commitments to shared values and principles and have a clear, long-standing commitment for each other to be engaged and be working together. And my last point is about the dream. I really think that we have to be reminded that European Union has actually grew up from a dream. It was that time when European politicians have decided to put their grievances aside and to agree to unite together. And we in Ukraine, over the last couple of years, have been seen as last romantics of Europe, because we have shown such a special passion for the European Union and its values and its flag, when many have been criticizing already European bureaucracy, when many have been tired of the European bureaucracy. So I think while we have been striving to overcome our heritage for Soviet heritage and this imperial heritage, as I've mentioned, for decades, we understand in Ukraine how precious the European achievements are. And we want to see not only us dreaming about European values being deeply installed in our country and European procedures and rules being deeply installed in our countries, but we're also hoping that Europeans will be able and capable of restoring their trust and their strength and belief in the achievements of the European Union. The real strength of the European idea lies in this transformative power and its ability to spread its values beyond the borders. And the history of the Union is the history of enlargements and the history of economic growth and democratic transformation for the continent. And today, as never before, this European idea has to be revitalized, and we should not be asking ourselves what is possible. I think we all should be asking ourselves what is desired. And with this thought, what is desired for Ukraine, for EU, for common, secure, prosperous, and democratic future of the continent, with this thought, I think we will be able to be stronger together and to achieve a lot, both in the 2019 and in the years to come. Thank you.
Pani Ivanna, thank you very much for sharing this dream of renaissance of European idea. And my personal take-off is Ukraine as an integral part of the European future. I cannot agree more with this, and I hope that each of you as well has your personal take-off from this really indeed rich contribution. Thank you very much. And I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Danielsson to share the view on EU ideas of the task 2019 with regard to the EU itself and EU-Ukraine relations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to focus on the Ukraine relations. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Deputy Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. What I will do is that I think I focus on 3 points. And before I do that, I think it's very timely that we have this discussion today. It comes right after a fairly important discussion among member states about Ukraine last week. And it comes in view of further, I think, steps in Ukraine, not least the elections that are coming up, and also the very strong and further engagement that comes from the European Union and partners, United States, not to be forgotten at all, but on the contrary, being a very, very important partner in the future to Ukraine. Now, the 3 points I would like to make is firstly what you mentioned, Deputy Prime Minister, 5 years since the revolution of dignity, 5 years since people went in the streets of Kiev, Some paid the ultimate price for it. And the reason this happened was because a wish to live in a better life, a more democratic society, and a wish to change the destiny of the country. I think it's important to have that as a starting point, because that is also, I think, the way to look on where Ukraine is today. And my second point is that one. I think there is a tendency, not least in discussions about Ukraine, to focus, and rightly so, focus on what needs to be done. But I think it is essential also to have in mind what has happened. And that not least because of the involvement of civil society and of the Ukrainian society at large. And what I'm thinking of is reforms that actually has happened. I'm thinking of the first steps and fairly far-reaching steps when it comes to the financial sector, the banking sector. I'm thinking of the macro-financial reforms that has been painful, but has been made, which means that Ukraine is on the path of macro-financial stability. I'm thinking of the steps that have been taken when it comes to reform of the energy sector. There are issues that needs to be continued to be done, but quite substantive efforts have been done. And I'm thinking also of the wish to start to move in the direction of putting into place a more sustainable structure for fighting, I think, the biggest scores in Ukraine, namely corruption, through the setting up of the independent authority for fighting corruption, and most recently for setting up the High Court for fighting corruption specifically. And there has also been one element which we have been very active in and has to do with governance, and that is the decentralization reform, which from our part we believe is very, very important, in fact essential in order to create this sustainability. And all this has happened although there has been an illegal annexation of part of the country. And all this has happened although there has been aggression in the east of the country. And all this has happened although there is a substantial number of Ukrainians who does not live where they would like to live, but who are internally displaced. I think that's important to have that in mind when we discuss Ukraine. And then that brings me to the third element. It's clear that from where we stand, that more needs to be done. It's clear that there are important part of reforms that needs to be further implemented, where the first steps have been made, but where actual implementation needs to take place. And it's clear also that when it comes to the governance, there are also steps that needs to be taken further in order, if Ukraine would like to move forward on the reform path, which Deputy Prime Minister, you made so clear that it wishes, it's essential to continue the way ahead. Not least the involvement, I would argue, of civil society in that context. And let me say that we look with concern of the challenge and also violence that is put towards civil society in Ukraine and what we have seen over the last couple of months and years. So what are the areas which we would suggest from our part would be essential in those reform efforts? Well, I think we would put at the highest up corruption, because corruption is not only having a negative effect of the society at large, it's also something which have a very negative effect of the economy. It is much more difficult to get the investments that one would like to see happening unless corruption is being fought at all its levels. And we all know how difficult it is, but it's something which I was reassured by Deputy Prime Minister by what you said, that this is indeed going to be a very, very high priority in the future. I think an important element of that one linked to it is privatization, which is important not only for fighting that, but also for having a more efficient business environment and taking all the potential that is out there when it comes to economic growth. I think we would also, and have been arguing for land reform as an important element to get the necessary monetarization of the agriculture sector, which is such an important part of the Ukrainian economy. I think we would argue that although lots of stuff has been made when it comes to the energy sector, there are still things that can be done, and not least the unbundling is an important element in that context, making Ukraine more efficient. And I think we would argue also that the steps that have been taken when it comes to public administration, and in that may include the judiciary, is going to be essential to get those reforms forward for all the reasons of services, but also for the necessary need to set up structures which work and function. And there are lots of others, but let me also say the business environment in general, which is very important in order to draw the necessary and all the benefits out of the existing agreement, not least with the European Union, but also with other third countries. Now, finally, let me just point to what we from the EU side can do to help Ukraine, because of course this is for Ukraine to do the necessary reforms, and it's your agenda. I think the way we can do it is, on the one hand, to have these kind of discussions, to support civil society, to be part of a discussion and dialogue, and be able to both listen but also perhaps give our advice in those discussions. I think we also provide for an agenda jointly with the association agenda for reforms. It's immensely ambitious, and you rightly pointed to it's the most ambitious agreement we have with any third country in terms of association. It might be overtaken quite soon, in fact, but for the time being it isn't. I'm thinking about Brexit. But in terms of that agenda, I think we need to try to find a way of engagement around it. It is a boring agenda, one can think, but it is essential. And you, civil society, and those who are interested in Ukraine, I think you have all the interest to try to help to focus on it so that the reforms actually are taking place. And then we have the financial assistance, where we have so far, from the European side, contributed with 14 billion euros since 2014 in terms of both loans but also in grants. Grants altogether something like 1.3 billion. This we will continue to do, and very strongly do that, because this is European priority. And what we're going to do is, together with you, Deputy Prime Minister, and the government, get the right focus so that we are focusing on the right things. And for the time being, the focus will be on public administrative reform, it will be on public financial management, it will be on the energy sector and help in that one, and it will very much be also in the form of decentralization. And finally, I think it is by the political engagement. I don't know how many of you read the speech by President of the European Council. I think it's very worthwhile reading, because it sets out a clear vision, and also both on the relations between the EU and Ukraine, and also on the visions ahead. But just to give you a sense of the priority, I think this week Vice President Dombrovskis will go to Ukraine. He will go down and visit the Azov Sea region, where we had very recently also a group or a mission from the EU in order to outline what kind of support we can give. And I think we're going to continue to see that kind of engagement very strongly from the EU side as we are moving ahead. And just not to forget it towards the end, of course, essential is free and fair elections. And therefore, what we're going to see in the coming weeks, both in the run-up to it, but also election day proper, will be essential. And I don't think we should have any illusions about the willingness of forces outside the democratic structures of Ukraine to try to influence those elections in a negative way. And I think that is also something which, from our part, we will have to keep a close eye to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danielsson, for, first of all, recognition the efforts of Ukraine, and then setting the priorities for assistance for Ukraine. And from my side, I would just only say that it's also efforts and the contribution of EU to restoring territorial integrity and preserving the statehood would be also highly welcome. And now I give the floor to Ms. Witmer to give us the US prospects on the task 2019.
Thank you, Olena. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me to join the panel today. My colleague is very sad that he is unable to be here. He is unfortunately stuck in Washington with a very high fever. But I did want to talk a little bit about the year ahead and onward for the United States' relationship with Ukraine. The outcome of Ukraine's 2019 presidential election remains difficult to predict, but whatever the result, the United States' priorities in Ukraine will remain unchanged. First and foremost, our approach will be driven by our commitment to the success of a stable, prosperous, democratic, and free Ukraine. The United States supports a democratic Ukraine firmly anchored in Europe, secure within its internationally recognized borders, and with an effective and accountable government. Ukraine is at the center of a geopolitical struggle for the future of Europe. And as President Tusk said so eloquently last week in Kiev, as Deputy Prime Minister has mentioned, there can be no Europe without Ukraine. Second, the United States will continue to stand with Ukraine as it responds to and builds resilience against Russian aggression. Unfortunately, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is unrelenting and wide-ranging, from the occupation of Crimea and the Russian-backed military conflict in the east, to the Kerch Strait, to cyber attacks, propaganda, and the manipulation of energy supplies. The United States will continue to call attention to Russia's ongoing efforts to destabilize Ukraine. Our sanctions will remain in place against Russia until Moscow fully implements the Minsk agreements and returns control of the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. We will never accept anything less than a full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. We will also work with allies and partners to maintain a unified front in the face of Russia's continuing disregard for international norms. We welcome the European Union's decision to impose sanctions linked to Russia's unjustified attack on Ukrainian vessels in the Black Sea, and we are exploring options with our allies and partners to impose further costs on Russia for the attacks. As we continue to condemn the actions by Russia for the actions in the Kerch Strait, we are also working with our European partners on imposing a cost for Russia for its unjustified attack on Ukrainian vessels, and we'll continue to do so. A third certainty post-election is our commitment to helping Ukraine advance the additional reforms needed for further Western integration. We know reform is difficult and it takes time, especially in a year that will witness both the presidential and parliamentary elections. But Ukraine's long-term success and resilience depends on its commitment to reform. We are happy to note that Ukraine has implemented a number of important reforms since the Revolution of Dignity, several of which my colleagues have mentioned: decentralization, economic and corporate and governance reforms, healthcare and pension reforms, and anti-corruption. And anti-corruption efforts have marked important steps on Ukraine's Western trajectory. Some of the hardest steps remain, however, including ensuring that entrenched interests do not succeed in undermining hard-won gains. One immediate test of Ukraine's progress will be the upcoming elections. The elections must be free and fair. For the reform process to move forward, all voices must be heard and protected. We too are concerned about the rising number of attacks on civil society activists. The attacks damage Ukraine's reputation and must be investigated fully and quickly. Just as our support for Ukraine will remain unchanged after the election, so will our expectations. We look for Ukraine to maintain its commitments to the Minsk agreements. While the Minsk agreements are imperfect, they acknowledge that Ukraine is sovereign over the territory in eastern Ukraine, currently controlled by Russia's proxy authorities. Moreover, the agreements provide a roadmap for the disarmament of Russian-led forces and the full restoration of Ukrainian government control over the Donbass. Ukraine's continuing commitment to Minsk will also shine a brighter light on Russia's intransigence. Russia has not engaged constructively in the Minsk talks. Instead, as Russia blocks progress towards a political settlement, it continues to fuel a hot conflict which has killed over 13,000, and Russian-led forces are responsible for the deaths of almost 100 Ukrainian service members just this year. We will also urge continued compliance with the new IMF program in 2019. Investors will be watching closely, and market confidence will help to determine Ukraine's ability to raise money to service its debt. We will watch for a strong show of support from the government for Ukraine's anti-corruption institutions. And of course, we're glad to hear from the EU and Her Excellency that this is a priority as well for Ukraine. In particular, the international community will be focused on judicial reform, as my EU colleague has noted, as Ukraine selects judges for and prepares to stand up its high anti-corruption court. This is important. 2019 will be a historic year for Ukraine. Regardless of the outcome of the elections, the people of Ukraine have already made one clear choice. The revolution of dignity made clear that Ukrainians seek a Western future, a European future. Challenges remain, but Ukraine is now on an increasingly irreversible path, and the United States is proud to partner with Ukraine on that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Witmer. And now, without any further ado, we are opening the floor for your questions and comments. We have about 15 minutes. Please, in advance, I'm asking you to be concise and concrete and address your question. So we will first round of 3-4 questions, and then we will see if we will have the second one, depending on the time. Thank you. So I saw Pan Taras. Yes, first. Thank you. I saw the hand is over there. Dmitro, I saw you. And yes, so we'll take and Sergey, and then we will close. If you want to speak, the button is just in front of you with the sign of, I don't know how to describe this.
Thank you very much. I have not a question, but rather a comment and recommendation on the same topic of corruption, based on the words of Mr. Danielsson. Actually, just to react quickly, we just published the report on association agreement implementation with EU support within the Civic Synergy project, with the involvement of civil society experts of the civil society platform from Ukrainian side. It mostly goes about those technical things, boring things, what you mentioned about economic integration. But there is one particular recommendation here, also in this report, on the corruption. What can be done? European Union has a very good methodology of anti-corruption reports. We know that it was issued, then not discontinued, but methodology is there. And I think, and we think, we make this recommendation in this report, that it might be a good idea to discuss between Ukrainian government and the European Commission, maybe to also to make this such an assessment of the anti-corruption reports for Ukraine. Because right now we have, what we have in the discussion about level of corruption in Ukraine is really kind of discussing the perceptions. Whether the perception is that we have huge corruption, or whether the perception is that we actually have done quite a lot to combat corruption. We have the major reference point is actually the corruption perception index of the Transparency International. Very good index, but again, it's about perception. It's only about one side of thing. It's not, it's kind of, if we go in deeper, it might be kind of quite a lot of questions. So I think that we make this recommendation that this might be a very good idea of what concretely EU can do and which doesn't really demand quite a lot of resources or political, I don't know, commitments towards Ukraine for the incentives. It's just really assessment according to European methodology. I think Ukrainian government would also should consider it seriously. Thank you.
I would like to address or to ask Ms. Witmer regarding her comments on Minsk agreements and so on. As you have shown that it is the key, or at least the main issue that you expect Ukraine or the new Ukrainian president from, but at the same time you say that you would support Ukraine and Ukrainian president in any case. So could you please link it? What does it mean if the new president would not obey Minsk agreement and would try to replace it? Means something? And again, as we would have representatives of all key candidates here, can we be sure that you would address them with these ideas, because not all of them are present at these panels? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vera Zhyachko, Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. My question is for the Vice Prime Minister, and it's more on the regional dimension. So basically, Ukraine is a key country within the Eastern Partnership regional policy, and the debate about how to reshape this policy beyond 2020 has already started. So my question is, where do you see the added value for the Eastern Partnership beyond 2020? What are the Ukrainian government thoughts on this agenda for the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this really indeed interesting and good questions. And now the floor to the speakers. In the reverse order.
Sure. So in short, I'm not going to speak to hypothetical situation. However, the United States is committed to the success of a stable, prosperous, democratic, and free Ukraine, and within an international an international world that supports its territorial integrity. If you're stating that a new president would not support the current territorial integrity of Ukraine, then that's something we'd have to address at that time. But at the moment, I would find that difficult to believe. Thank you. Address how? I'm sorry, what do you mean? So we support Ukraine, as I've said repeatedly, and we have committed both significant resources and political capital to supporting Ukraine, and that is our intention going forward. If at some point there is a significant divergence, then we would, of course, look at that again, but at the moment we plan to continue supporting Ukraine. Thank you.
Very good comment. On the issue as such, member states are responsible. And we have seen recently that in some member states, issues about money laundering or other activities of a similar kind have been revealed. I'm thinking of Denmark, and I'm thinking about a country I know best, Sweden, very recently. And that's how it should be. Now, you pointed to some other, or at least one other member state, and maybe there's room for improvement there. You're right that when looking on the streams of or alleged streams, because I mean, it goes beyond that, money streams, they tend to go into Europe. So I think there is an issue here that one should look into. On the issue of corruption report, I think that was interesting as a suggestion, and I will bring that with me. I think there is something in it that the more one could clarify and be clear on corruption, the more efficient our comments and our discussions will be, probably. But on the general, you said perception. Perception is indeed important, and I think in the case of Ukraine, it's also linked to facts on the ground. And that's why I think Deputy Prime Minister and we together, I mean you primarily, are working so hard in fighting corruption, because it has such a negative effect on the society in general, and it has a very negative effect also on being able to take on the potential that the and I'm pointing to the association agreement and the free trade agreement, provides for. I had the pleasure the other day to talk to some investors who are interested to invest in the neighborhood generally, and Ukraine, of course, is one important element. And the first thing that they bring up is this issue. So there is an issue here that needs to be addressed for that purpose. But as I mentioned, I think the elements, some of the elements are there through the reforms that have been taken. I think when we look on it, we believe that the prosecution is an important element to look into. We believe that it is essential to continue to work on the issue of privatization. And of course, the whole reform of judiciary will play a very important role as well.
Thank you. May I just follow up on this with your permission? Because I agree that perception is important with regard to corruption, but also I think a lot is actually being done to create this perception and not necessarily based on the objective grounds. Because whatever amplifies the message that Ukraine is a failed, corrupt state and fascist state, which is the Russian narrative, all of this is being highly amplified in all the European and worldwide media, as well as in quite a lot of Ukrainian media. And then you're getting a twisted picture of perception, and all the boring and unsexy deregulatory efforts that are taking away the loopholes for the corruption are not being, are not getting it to the major first pages of the newspapers in order to say how much Ukraine has actually cut on possibilities for corruption on different levels. So therefore, I would really welcome this initiative to try to look on a very, very specific and maybe, again, boring bureaucratic way of assessment as opposed to playing with perceptions, because we are not alone playing on this ground. If we were playing in the field which is fair, then maybe. But unfortunately, this field has a lot of disinformation and a lot of distortion over the last couple of years. I think if you just go back 5 years ago, I think under Yanukovych, according to media, according to internal media in Ukraine, and according to external media, Ukraine was not a corrupt state at all. And coming from that understanding, we should actually make the judgment of what perception does with corruption in Ukraine and reality. With regard to Eastern Partnership, yes, I'm totally aware that the debate with regard of how the Eastern Partnership could be seen as yet additional track and additional anchor of the European integration for Eastern Partnership countries. We are very much interested to see Eastern Partnership further developing along the lines that have been also supported by the European Parliament, along the lines of having Eastern Partnership Plus, countries that do share similar goals, similar dreams, similar instruments, having association agreements with the EU, and actually developing and transforming them according to the rules and principles of the European Union. Obviously, all of this positive engagement that could be done through the Eastern Partnership as a hub for all the Eastern Partnership countries is also should also be developed further. But definitely all the countries that have the association agreements are interested in having this as a supportive policy as opposed to regressive policy. And I know that that was exactly the idea when Poland and Sweden have come with this idea. That was about moving forward together, and that therefore I think with keeping this in mind, I think on that basis we have to develop Eastern Partnership further. And it's definitely about infrastructure, it's definitely about mobility, it's definitely about integration and connection, it's definitely about people-to-people contacts, about students, about education, about all of that basis that actually in the long run, I hope, will also have a very similar impact on those countries that at this point did not make their minds in terms of their future, along with the European values and European Union.
Thank you very much. Just to add for this in partnership from civil society perspective, because our committee is also very much engaged in it, and we are going to mark the 10th anniversary, and we have a special body here that is dedicated to our contacts with Eastern Partnership countries and their civil societies. We just had approved in our bureau. We have a special paper that we're going to develop, a special opinion dedicated on the Eastern Partnership and as a positive tool and instrument of civil society cooperation. So I fully agree on this aspect here, and our committee is always the focus point that helps also DGNIA in our contacts with civil society from Eastern Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are right in time. I'm really indeed thankful. I hope you will join me for this insightful session, who really set up the scene and pave the way for our next two sessions. As they say, stay with us, because the more interesting other interesting parts are to come, and the advisors to the candidates of the presidential candidates in Ukraine are, among other things, are going to present the visions of Ukraine. So, with you, I would like to thank the speakers. First of all, I would like to thank you for your active participation and interesting questions. We close this session and we come back here in 15 minutes in safe hands of Professor Burakovsky, who will moderate the next session, and together with Ukrainian and EU experts will lead us through opportunities and constraints of the electoral campaign 2019. Thank you very much. Thank you.